of people. How do they feel about the militarization?
Well, good morning, everyone. You are listening to Global Affairs Unfiltered with me, Jack Stockwell. And on the stream, welcome to those who are on the stream. Tuesday morning, the 14th day of July, 2026. And I kind of want to pick up where I left off yesterday because of the tremendous stream of dynamics that are taking place. Someone asked me if I wasn't feeling well yesterday after the show. I wasn't. Feeling pretty weak, actually, for some reason. But I feel a little bit better this morning, and we'll try to give you an uninterrupted program. I presume I am broadcasting at K-Talk. I can see my recording taking place across my computer screen. So until I hear something from the people who quite often will let me know what I'm doing, it's always nice to have somebody looking over your shoulder to let you know what you're doing. I will just proceed on here as though everything was just fine and we're back to normal broadcast. However, do you know anybody that's unreasonable? Let me start off this morning with that question. Do you know anybody you can't talk to? Do you know somebody who simply cannot see anything outside of their worldview to the point of talking over you, yelling at you, whatever else, regardless of whether it's family stuff, politics stuff, business stuff, personal stuff? You know anybody that's completely, totally unreasonable? Well, I kind of get that idea. Well, I know people like that. Fortunately, I don't know very many people like that because I try to avoid them. But when it comes to the world setting, I think a person who is reasonable, and I can apply that in personal relationships as well, is the most revolutionary thing an individual and certainly a population or a nation can do, is to sit down and be reasonable. And there is an epidemic of reason that is starting to break out among the people of our country. Fortunately, now in the 250th year of the nation's birth, and I think it would be welcomed by most of the rest of the world. It is, for example, let me give you something that the government is doing that is completely unreasonable, for contrast here. Section 219, and I talked to a patient about this yesterday in the clinic, very much concerned about it himself. Section 219 of the National Defense Authorization Act that I've been talking about for over a month, maybe 2 months, to be passed by a Congress that in so doing renders itself powerless in the very matter of war and peace, for which it, as representatives of you and me, the American people, not moneyed lobbies, and no other branch of government or unelected civil servant or permanent bureaucracy must be held accountable according to the Constitution of the United States. That is, it is not within the powers of Congress by its passing that should be called the, I've heard it referred to as the Jonathan Pollard U.S.-Israel War Technology Cooperation Initiative. I think that's perfect. And you remember Jonathan Pollard, the biggest spy, years and years in prison for revealing very sensitive information to Israel. Finally let out of prison, I believe by President Trump in his first administration. I might be wrong, but I think that's true. Immediately running off to Israel, and had a meeting recently. Well, I'm getting out in the woods. I don't want to talk about that. Some people have referred Section 219 of the coming military authorization as a Jonathan Pollard type of marriage between the United States and Israel as far as war and technology is concerned. And now, if Congress passes that to arbitrarily abdicate, Congress will essentially be repudiating their own power, which would require a deliberate alteration of the Constitution of the United States, because a passage of House 219 and its counterpart, Senate 1217, would be treason against this country and the rest of the world. And one of its leading supporters just died, thank goodness, this weekend. I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the program. And now the most reasonable among the American people, as well as those outside the United States, who realize the danger that such an action would pose to the rest of this planet. Because keep in mind, should Israeli generals have control of American armed forces, and of course, well, it would be very limited in a very small part of the world. Yeah, to start. What about when Israel wants to attack Syria? When Israel wants to attack Turkey? When Israel wants to attack Egypt? They don't have the men to do it. And so they are pushing the passage of this legislation so they have American service people, men and women, to fill those ranks. So there has to be some unified action by any and all appropriate means to reverse this course. And it's essential that the people be reasonable, since the Trump administration is not reasonable. Now, what we saw in the NATO summit, which just recently concluded in Ankara, was just fraught with absurdities. And because they were all lining up to kiss Trump's ass. It's just ridiculous, the kind of discussions that were coming out. There were a few objectors, but most of them were the sycophants who want to make sure that Trump doesn't abandon NATO. And some of the most ridiculous statements of the summit was by Trump, who said that there was so much love in the air in this meeting. Yeah, because these people probably, now this is just me and I may be crazy here, these people probably all sent all kinds of flowers, giant shrimp, fresh lobster, and whatever it is that Trump likes, probably a new set of golf balls, to his hotel room before he stood up to speak about how much love there was in the air. Now, how can you have love, really, in the presence of all these warmongers, is very difficult to understand, because he claims that this was happening. Wonderful love. And obviously he's very happy because he got these stupid Germans, mainly Pistorius and Meretz, to buy the Tomahawk cruise missiles for at least $1.2 billion, plus a few more million. And while, before, Biden had basically promised that these Tomahawk missiles would be in Germany for nothing. The U.S. was going to sell the Tomahawks to Germany for nothing when Biden was still president. So it's obviously in the very interest of whoever is the war makers here in this country, those who make the Tomahawk, Raytheon, I think it's Raytheon, which is being, this is totally contrary to the interests of Germany. It just makes them a bigger Oreshnik or Khorramshahr missile target for Russia. And when you are a prime target for such medium range, nuclear capable first strike missiles, what does that do to the security issues of your country? But now instead, Germany is going to pay for it. Now, every now and then, Trump does something to make me think that he's thinking. And as Scott Ritter pointed out, he thinks Trump, while he's the worst president we've had in a long time, he may be the most truthful because he's not acting under a political frame set that caused previous presidents to buffer what they had to say. And that he just shoots off at the mouth, and a lot of times what he says is true. And now that he is being able to carry on the work of former President Biden in the sense of supplying Germany with Tomahawks, now Germany's going to pay for it. But Germany doesn't have the money to pay for them. And you don't make Tomahawks like you make hamburgers. But if you think about it, in the way things were previously, it was part of this multi-domain operation concept to which belonged not just Tomahawks, but satellites, intelligence, electronic warfighting technology, cyber capabilities, data fusion, and that would allow for far-reaching precision strikes, which was all part of one big old coherent package. And the Tomahawk was the top of the spear. Now, Germany is buying the top without the spear, having all the costs, and that's completely insane. So it's naturally clear that Trump has once again, through the art of the deal, happy to sell it to the Germans. It just shows you the insanity. Mark Antony, in the Act 3 speech in Julius Caesar, made this statement: "O judgment, thou art fled to brutish beasts, and men have lost their reason." That comment by Mark Antony might enlighten those who should wonder how the mass assassination policies of the Israeli regime and the American government carried out in Iran actually resulted, interestingly enough, if you caught it, the largest assembly ever recorded in human history. Over 40 million people in Iran. Millions of those people believed they were possibly walking to their deaths from American and Israeli assassination attempts at the memorial for Ali Khomeini, and they assembled nonetheless. Members of the Epstein class deny that there is this unseen power. But Mark Antony referred to it in that speech as well, where he said, "The awful shadow of some unseen power floats, though unseen, among us." As Antony is trying to turn the crowd against Cassius and Brutus, who were loyal and honest Romans. One of my favorite of Shakespeare's plays, especially Antony's speech. But the members of the Epstein class deny that there is this unseen power floating out there. I don't know what else to call it. Other people are referring to it as the Epstein class. It only makes sense to me that that's probably what and who they are. But I have a quote here from LaRouche that I like. He said this: "In popular jargon, and unfortunately also amongst some elements of our political intelligence community, There is an obsession with the modern American habit of demanding that reality and ideas come in popularly advertised brand name packages, with contents explained in the simplest terms as typical Madison Avenue advertising slogan. The sort of person who insists that his facts should come in popularly advertised brand labeled packages should not expose himself to the mental anguish he will suffer in confronting even the simple day-to-day truths of routine counterintelligence work. On this level, the world is very complicated, and in this realm there are few allies, and almost no one operates openly under the brand label of the 1, 2, or 3 interests he ultimately serves. A great description of the Epstein class. So a council of reason was proposed, immediately needed, of course. It has to be assembled from citizens around this planet, especially young citizens, those who believe that the world historic importance of the United States Revolution against that empire of ideas of collectivism and autocracy control of the masses, summarized in the Declaration of Independence. I mean, it's not enough, as India is presently doing, to close down places like the Jaipur Polo Ground where King Charles III, then Prince of Wales, had played in the past, and other symbols of colonial rule. It is Winston Churchill's empire of the mind that has to be defeated by the power of reason, as Roosevelt tried to do when meeting with Churchill and Stalin. All right, the big news from yesterday. President Donald Trump, in a social media posting, has declared, so this shall allay your fears of increasing prices at the pump, that the Strait of Hormuz is open for all except Iran and its customers. This is right out of Saturday Night Live. This is unbelievable. The man who ended up shutting down the Strait of Hormuz is now going to become the guardian of the Hormuz Strait. You understand that, right? Prior to February 28th, the strait was open to any and all. Whether helium or fertilizer or oil or natural gas or whatever else was moving through the strait, it was open to any and all. And then, after the attack by Israel and the United States on Iran, Iran closed down the strait, and it's still closed down. Because the strait, you know how far it is from the strait up to Karg Island? It's as far as from here to Los Angeles. And that strait has very high cliffs on both sides, but especially the eastern side of the strait, or the entire Gulf. Lined with missile launching sites, most undetected until the rock rolls away and the missiles comes forth. And once Iran shut down the strait, which tells you we lost the war against Iran. If we had won the war, the strait would be open without restriction, without counterattack by Iran. But since Iran can sink anything going through there, and they have sent drones against the ships that were not authorized, not to sink them, just to set them on fire as a warning that they could be sunk. And when President Trump announces that it's now open, implies that it was closed. Well, we didn't close it. Iran closed it. And Iran has not had much to say about the United States becoming the guardian of the strait. Now, Iran was charging 1% to 2%. What do you call it? a tax, a duty, some kind of cost imposed on the ships passing through. And now Trump has jumped that up to 20%. So suppose a tanker, and it can't be a friend of Iran, it has to be one of the Gulf states, is carrying $100 million worth of oil. I don't know how much these tankers carry. Some of them are huge. Some of these tankers are so big they can carry an average sized tanker in their hold by themselves. But suppose a ship carrying $100 million worth of oil was passing through. Trump is now going to impose a 20% fee, which in other words, if you want to move 100 million out, you got to pay the United States 20 million to do so. Where does this come from? Who talks like that? So yesterday on Truth Social, the president said this: we are reinstating the Iranian blockade. Well, it was already blockaded, but it looks like the United States is now going to take credit for it. We are reinstating the Iranian blockade, so named because it's only stopping Iran's ships or customers from entering or leaving. All other countries will have fair and open use of the strait. The USA will be, from this point forward, known as the guardian of the Hormuz Strait. But as such, and as a matter of fairness, will be reimbursed at the rate of 20% on all cargo shipped, for any and all costs necessary to do the job of providing safety and security to this very volatile section of the world. The process and formation will begin immediately. Then Trump had earlier told Fox News that the U.S. is going to keep and run the strait. He said, we will become the guardian of the strait. Maybe we'll call it the guardian angel of the strait, and we should be reimbursed for that. We're going to guard it. We're going to get paid for guarding it. A lot of money, he said. We're going to be reimbursed because the other nations are very wealthy. They're on our side, and we can't be expected to do that for nothing. As they say, you can't make this stuff up. I don't know that the best Hollywood writers can make this stuff up. And what's Iran going to do? Just sit back and let this happen? Colonel Ebrahim Zolfakhari, the spokesman for Iran's Qatam al-Anbiya Central Headquarters, I probably massacred that, put the responsibility for destabilizing the region squarely on the United States. He said this: America's repeated adventurism and malicious acts to interfere in the management of the Strait of Hormuz have seriously endangered regional security, international trade, and the passage of oil tankers and commercial vehicles. Ultimately, he continues, the cooperation of some regional countries has also caused the risk of war spreading across the region to increase. Accordingly, it is hereby declared, from previous warnings, we will not, under any circumstances, allow the United States to interfere in the management of the Strait of Hormuz, and we will not do so in the future. So what's happened since then? Since that comment was made? I don't know what occupies my mind more right now. While I'm taking care of my patients, and I had a great time with them yesterday. Just love taking care of people the way we do in our clinic. Just seeing their eyes open up, just seeing the relief come across their face from weeks, if not months, of pain disappearing while they stand there. I don't know if it's that, or my excitement over the World Cup that will end this Sunday in the final, or this news about the Middle East or the Ukraine or whatever else is going on around the world. Because from moment to moment, it is one big entertaining scene for me. Now, another entertaining thing, of course, was the patron of endless wars going off to his reward this weekend. U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham, known, as I have pointed out many times on my show, for his unbridled enthusiasm for all these unconstitutional, I repeat in capital letters, unconstitutional imperial wars of the United States, died Saturday night, July 11th, after returning from a short visit to the Ukraine. His trip was the 10th he's made since Putin's special military operation began in February of 2022. His obvious Russophobia and hatred for Putin has led him to demand that the United States and NATO fully arm the neo-Nazi militia embedded in the Ukrainian defense and security forces. And he has appeared in videos joking with the Banderite neo-Nazi terrorist, along with his close ally, who also has gone to his reward, fellow war hawk Senator John McCain. And so you don't have to go back in the news very far to see where Graham is referring to Putin as a thug and a bully. Graham continued to insist that the United States provide an air defense for Ukraine and long-range missiles to strike targets deep in Russia. And when he was questioned about how much this is going to cost, the billions of dollars of weapons and aid provided by Biden and Trump administrations, he just shrugged off the costs, describing it as a good deal. Why? Because it kills Russians. He should never have been let out of his bedroom. In congressional hearings, he often lied, that the funds that were being given to the Ukraine were loans, knowing that they would never, ever be repaid, or the costs would be covered by the U.S. seizure of Ukraine's raw material wealth. So he was equally unhinged, maybe even more so in his support for Netanyahu's regime's genocidal attacks on the Palestinians in Gaza. In an interview February of this year, Graham defended Israel's murder of children in Gaza by saying this, that the death of Palestinian children was necessary to ensure the survival of Israel. A United States senator saying something like that. Now ask if this view represents Christian values when he made that comment. He compared it to the Allied attacks in World War II. He said this, I tried to play this yesterday, but there was too much feedback, where he said, did we hesitate while bombing German cities, starving civilians, or dropping bombs on every city until it was destroyed? War is brutal, he said. Then he said to defeat Hamas in Gaza, he argued that Israel would be justified if they were to use nuclear weapons against Hamas in Gaza. Then he said this, and I've heard it. This is Hiroshima and Nagasaki on steroids. And this man, across the street, the flag is at half-mast. I presume it's for Graham. This justification for Zionist genocide just absolutely endeared him to Prime Minister Netanyahu, who was second only to President Trump in his praise for Graham. Trump referred to him here yesterday as a great American patriot. He said, essentially, we agree on almost everything. Netanyahu referred to Graham as one of the great champions of the American-Israel alliance, and I have lost a beloved friend. The only thing missing was tears in his eyes. Needless to say, Graham fully supported the U.S.-Israeli war against Iran, vilifying Iran's leaders as religious Nazis and spreading the lie that Iran was just weeks away from possessing nuclear weapons. Now, has our president, Donald Trump, who ran in 2024, 2 years ago, as a peace candidate, committed to reducing the budget deficit? Has he reversed his brand to side with the war hawks he once ferociously denounced? He seems at some level to be aware that the shutting down of oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz, which is a consequence of the collapse of the ceasefire based on the MOU, threatens to unleash a global financial disruption, making him the new Herbert Hoover. And so Graham's demands for more defense spending has been a primary reason for why the U.S. deficit has hit record levels. Graham, as chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, has presided over a record growth in the United States debt. The debt grew by $1.9 trillion in fiscal year 2026. And interest on the federal debt has reached now $24 billion a week, $100 billion a month. And Trump and Graham agreed on a massive increase in defense spending for the next fiscal year, adding $500 billion to the $100 trillion previously planned. So Graham's death may have spared him for the blame for the coming round of military defeats and financial implosion, but not from the judgment of history. Listening to Scott Ritter this morning, he said this: Lindsey Graham postured himself as a man of integrity and honor, a patriot's patriot, who put service to the country above all else, a Christian. But the reality is he is anything but, the quote continues. Lindsey Graham was a servant of sin. Lindsey Graham's life was defined by a constant, intense anger and hatred towards others, which led him to openly advocate for violence and revenge against anybody who did not embrace his world vision. Wow. So it'll be interesting to watch in the days ahead. And I don't know, is when a senator dies, do they don't put their coffin in the Capitol building, do they? I don't think they do that. Maybe for the president. I don't think they would do that for a senator. But there's going to be some kind of something in his memory, at least in South Carolina. And now his younger sister has been appointed by the governor to take his place until January 3rd of next year. Well, unfortunately, this world of ours is still on a trajectory towards total escalation because, I started out talking about, do you know anybody unreasonable? You must have a sibling, an uncle, an aunt, cousins, neighborhood members, church members, business people who represent someone who is completely unreasonable. And here we have a world full of leaders who are like that, because the insanity factor in the upper echelons of the political class is absolutely dominant. And therefore, they are not recognizing that, for example, if you at the same time simultaneously escalate these two theaters of war, no good end can possibly come from it. When you look at the situation around Iran as the resumption now of strikes in both directions, the United States had up until now, I think, 3 major waves of strikes hitting many of the targets in Iran, with the explicit aim to eliminate the ability of Iran to attack ships in the Strait of Hormuz because they were targeting missile launcher pads and things like that. Then Iran, on the other side, answered by attacking mainly U.S. military bases in Jordan, Bahrain, and Qatar. And obviously, the prospects of this, if not stopped, and there's no end in sight that it will, because the Iranians declared that these new strikes eliminated the half-year, 5-month, whatever, 4-month diplomatic negotiations of this last period. And it's unlikely that the diplomatic relations are going to resume, given the fact that there is a complete breakdown of any trust. So who's left for Kushner and Witkoff to talk to? We got real estate deals out here in Utah they could probably take advantage of. But in any case, the importance in this context is to make absolutely sure to stop and reject the National Defense Authorization Act, Section 219, as I started this program with, and the equivalent sections in the Senate versions, remains of utmost importance. That's probably the most important thing that any of us can do as citizens not only of the great state of Utah, and I consider myself not born here, but still a proud Utah, to contact my legislative representatives and say, hell no, on Section 219 of the NDAA. Because if these legislations go through, any importance of the U.S. Congress essentially vanishes, because decisions will be made even more out of the realm of Congress. And the fact that even somebody like Adam Smith, who now has changed his view because of pressure from his constituency, should give us a very, very strong motivation to do the same thing here in our state as constituents of our 4 congressional reps and our 2 senators. Hell no! Do not pass that legislation. Now, as I sit back and think about this, it is so crazy, especially one of the recent statements from our president, where he said that if he's assassinated, you heard this over the weekend, if Iran actually assassinates him, in other words, if Iran does what he did to Soleimani in his first term, or the continual assassination policies of the Israel-United States combine, assassinating everybody that they can that's in their way, should that be played against him, he's given orders that Iran be immediately attacked and smashed. I mean, it reads almost like an invitation for anybody who wants that to happen. Now, I may be going out here on the edge, and maybe I'm going too far, but this really upsets me. Does Israel want to see Iran totally smashed into the ground once and for all, over with? And if the president said, this is what's going to happen if I get assassinated, would it take an Iranian assassination attempt to do it? Or maybe somebody else? You get my drift. You know, it's really a stupid thing. But naturally, at this largest funeral procession that I talked about earlier, in the history of this planet, where the estimates were anywhere from 40 to 43 million people in different Iranian citizens or cities, naturally there were many signs calling for the death to America and death to Trump. And apparently, according to the Iranian daily Hamshahari, they had on their internet page. Basically, this is a more or less official Tehran daily newspaper with an edition of about 400,000 print copies. In any case, they basically had pictures of 13 Western politicians in jail clothes. I haven't seen this, I just heard about it. And one of them being Merz, but Trump, Netanyahu, Marco Rubio, Hegseth Huckabee, Brad Cooper, General, Israeli Defense Minister Katz, Prime Minister Macron, Maloney, Starmer. In any case, they've all been basically signs to be assassinated. Oh, like I said earlier, this is better than Saturday Night Live, which is nothing anymore. I find no attraction for it like it used to be. And now, in the meantime, as I spent a half an hour on it, Lindsey Graham is dead. And I would assume, outside of his family, nobody's terribly in grief about this, except maybe Netanyahu. Because as one article said, he was cartoonishly an evil man whose moral depravity touched on too many people. You know, being a complete bigot, he called the Iranian leaders, referring to them as Hitler, calling them religious Nazis. I mean, this is just unbelievable. Who attacked whom? In any case, he apparently died of sudden heart failure in his home. But as I was talking about yesterday, and I've looked into this a lot, in much greater detail since then, Larry Johnson said that Lindsey Graham had to have died in Ukraine because he set up the timeline to back this up by saying Graham arrived in Kyiv Friday morning, that he met with Zelensky, that he visited a drone factory. And then basically there's this big dispute. Was he able to catch a train out of Kyiv or not? And so on that, Johnson's claim is based that Graham was not able to board a train in Kyiv to go back to Warsaw until Saturday because he missed the train. In any case, there is, however, apparently an FBI investigation now going on into the death of Graham. Now, if that's out of the ordinary or not, I don't know. But in any case, I just wanted to mention that. Because when you take the time it takes for Graham to have left Kyiv on a 10-hour train to Warsaw and then fly a 10-hour flight from Warsaw to Washington, D.C., it puts him in Washington after 8:15 p.m. And apparently the FBI is now looking into this. Now, before the end of the program, I want to talk again about the NATO summit, which just the Comedy of Errors, another one of Shakespeare's plays, which just concluded in Ankara this weekend. Just comedy of errors, a comedy of absurdities. Maybe not so much errors. I think the most ridiculous statement coming out of the summit was, of course, by our president, who said that, as I said earlier in the program, there was so much love in the air. I'm sorry. There's just so much love in the air. How can you have love in the presence of such warmongers? It's very difficult to imagine. But he claims that was happening. The air was full of love. The meetings were full of love by people who want to see the end of Israel. I mean, and the end of Iran. By people who want to see the end of Russia at all costs, even to the using of nuclear weapons. Now, there's love for you. And he's very happy because he got these stupid Germans, Pistorius and Merz, as I said, to buy Tomahawk cruise missiles for at least $1.2 billion. And as I said earlier, Biden had promised them that for nothing. Oh, we'll pay it. We just want them based in Germany, so you can launch them from there to Russia. So those behind the war faction here in this country just probably salivating over that prospect. Not that just that their military or military industrial complex stocks will increase in value, and therefore the premiums they pay. Oh, excuse me. But that we're going to get the war on with Russia, maybe sooner than later. But it makes Germany a target, and Putin has been very clear about this. We find anybody in the West orchestrating some kind. Now, these are my words, not the Russian words. I'm not erudite or educated enough to speak as clearly as the Russians do. We find anybody out there manufacturing weapons to be used against our country. They are targets. We don't care where. And then at the end of the summit, Russia not included, of course, because Russia's not NATO, Lavrov, foreign minister for Russia, one of the most erudite of all spokespeople on this planet, said, we don't trust a single word anymore that comes out of the mouth of anybody in the West, as Russia continues to increase its military movements on the ground in Ukraine. Now that the ground is dry, the mud is dried up, they're advancing swiftly. And so when you have a Tomahawk that is nuclear capable, and those Tomahawks arrive in Germany, you don't think Russian intelligence is going to know exactly where they're at? And now, instead of giving them for free, as Biden wanted to do, Germany's going to pay for it. But if you think about it, the whole thing, as I mentioned earlier, was supposed to be one big package, not just Tomahawk missiles, but all the stuff that goes with it, all the electronic stuff, the satellite coordinating stuff, all the cyber data fusion, so that they could create far-reaching precision strikes inside of Russia, which you can't do without all that cyber and electronic warfighting capabilities. The Tomahawk was the top. The Tomahawk was the premier weapon. And now Germany is going to pay for this, which will be the complete destruction of their social systems. I've talked about this as well. Why do I focus on Germany? Because Germany is kind of the heart and core of productive capabilities of Europe. Their auto industry, even above Swedish or English auto industry, was one of the high points of the GDP of Europe. And now the indebtedness that this is going to cause Germany from now till 2030, when Pistorius wants to be war ready for Russia, is estimated just short of 1 billion euros. And already in 2030, the interest payment projected by the economists will be about 81 billion per year, which is 4 times as much as the present household for health services total in Germany. So it's like getting increasingly to the point where Hjalmar Schacht, who completely turned around the Nazi economy with his MEFO bills, which backed up by American banks, mind you, which at a point when they could not be rolled over was the beginning of World War II. Now, in light of all of that, when you look at former U.S. Navy Admiral and Supreme Allied Commander James Stavridis, quite interesting, because in commenting on the NATO summit, he said NATO members should give Trump a timeout for the rest of his tenure, reducing public exposure and joint endeavors to a bare minimum. Well, he's not the only one who thinks he should be shut up for a while. But all the remarks about Greenland that he made at the summit and love in the air and the idea of Mark Rutte being a great unifier, he basically says that the bloc is probably not in its last days, but the fundamentals between Washington and the rest of the NATO alliance are unlikely to improve anytime soon. Therefore, the bloc should reduce the frequency of its meetings and probably not hold another summit within 2 years to avoid Trump making such statements again. So that kind of gives you a sense of appreciation of some of the people, what they have of Trump at this point. And there is an article by Code Pink, basically by Medea Benjamin, discussing in all the many, many contradictions of NATO, which I'm not going to take the time to go through here, but this non-agreement with Spain and the disunity of its members. I mean, it's not a good condition of NATO, but they're still there having their meetings. And now there's also new attacks coming from Maria Zakharova on Germany because the second secretary to the German embassy in Moscow has been posting continuously videos on her Telegram channel emanating essentially Ukrainian propaganda from inside of Russia. Now, there's one more diplomatic clash between Germany and Russia, and the tensions between Poland and the Ukraine are definitely getting worse. Donald Tusk of Poland is demanding that Kyiv recognize the massacre of Poles by Nazi collaborators during World War II in order to mend its ties with Warsaw. And Kyiv needs to sober up to prevent further escalation in the role of Warsaw over the glorification of Ukrainian Nazi collaborators. And he said that this whole dispute has ignited nationalist lunatics on both sides, causing an avalanche of hatred on social media going back and forth. And he asked the Kyiv authorities to curb anti-Polish sentiment and promised that Warsaw would act with full force of law against anyone who commits crimes against Ukrainians on ethnic grounds. In any case, all I'm saying is that there's no love among all these different parties to the war, and it's just a terrible, terrible situation. For example, Rheinmetall, basically, the Rheinmetall is the premier war-making industry or member of war-making industry in Germany. They have a new contract with Raytheon, of all places, a 15-year project which is taking on the digitalization of combat training for British troops, which is basically sharing of the military-industrial complex of whole on both countries, Germany and England. And now the former Prime Minister of Italy, Giuseppe Conte, who is presently head of the M5 Star movement, is now accusing the West of creating a Russian threat in order to justify armament in Italy. And he's throwing away money to buy American weapons just to please Trump. And will end, it's what's going to happen. Any of these countries that are engaging in this kind of adoration of Trump by doing business with Trump's best friends, the military-industrial complex, they're going to end up cutting funds for healthcare, innovation, and education in their own countries. And so this is fabricating an even greater Russian threat to convince these various members of NATO that they need to arm themselves to teeth to counter it and to go to war. And they even mentioned 2030. And what's Russia doing? Russia listening to this stuff coming out of that NATO summit. Are they sitting around there in their evening meetings with their vodka, laughing at this? Or are they setting up offsetting strategies this early to make sure that the centers of industry in Western, Eastern Europe, whatever, that is installing these war-making capabilities are not becoming prime Oreshnik targets? And then all these different laws in Europe, another thing that was in the summit, allowing chat surveillance and all kinds of things that's fully going on. I mean, I think Europe is very well on its way to a dictatorship against which the so-called autocracies and dictatorships like China and others get pale in terms of envy if they see how the European Union is proceeding. Now, there was a petition being collected in Germany that had 450,000 signatures, like there was this demonstration in Berlin trying to give this to official places, but they were stopped by the police from delivering the 450,000 signatures in opposition to Merz and the government, for fear that Merz and the government would explode if this were to become popular. I mean, even the fact that in September, which is, 2 months away, there's going to be 2 elections in East Germany, where in both cases, the AfD, the alternate to Deutschland, is expected to win, which is essentially, it used to be called the German Trump faction. I think they're smarter than that now, but they're definitely antagonistic to the current socialist designs of Merz and the German parliament to cut back on social spending so they have enough money to buy Tomahawk missiles. And the same thing in France with Macron. And then you saw what happened with Starmer, and that his replacement is maybe even worse. Anyway, I got more, but there's no time. Lowell will be coming up here shortly, and you don't want to miss him, and I don't want to cut into his time. So I'm going to stop the recording so I can save it quickly when I stop broadcasting. This show is being recorded under the title, Trump, the Guardian of the Strait, He Closed. And then those of you on the stream, again, if you like and if you can share, it just increases the numbers. If you think somebody ought to listen to this program, you might want to share it with them. And we're busy as usual at the clinic. I'll be busy all day today. I'll be busy the whole week. Taking care of new people, which is my favorite thing to do. Taking care of new people and taking care of people who I haven't seen in years, who've been holding their correction for years, and now they're starting to hurt again. That's as I tell existing patients and new patients, my job is to get you out of the clinic, not keep you coming back, for Pete's sake. Find the problem, fix it, and set you back out there to your garden or your horses or whatever else you need freedom of movement in that spine. Consultations are free, but you got to schedule it through 801-523-1890 or the scheduling at jackstockwell.com. So I'm going to get out of here so that Lowell can take over. Lowell, you have a good show today, buddy. And I will see you all tomorrow for a health program.